Welcome to the Conversation Lab. I'm Don Schaefer. If democracy begins in conversation, then we need to nurture a culture where ordinary people like us routinely talk about those things that help us understand each other, whether it's about climate, race, religion, gender, or politics. When we're trying to make sense of our city and the world we live in, every question comes with a set of assumptions about the nature of ourselves and our place in a larger world. The Conversation Lab provides a safe place to talk about some of those things. This program is produced by CFRO-FM in Vancouver. It's available on air and online on various platforms, and we appreciate the help of Vancouver's community groups. David Ng is a PhD student at UBC Social Justice Institute. He's a queer feminist media artist and co-founder of Love Intersections, which is a media arts organization of queer artists of color. His current research and artistic practices grapple with queer, racialized, and diasporic identity and how intersectional identities can be expressed through media arts. His interests include imagining new possibilities of how queer, racialized artists can use their practice to transform communities. His work also includes recent collaborations with Primary Colors, which is a national initiative to put Indigenous arts practices at the center of the Canadian Arts Centre through the leadership of Indigenous artists supported by artists of color. I'm really glad we have this chance to get together because we see each other in the hallways. We talk briefly about schoolwork, but we never get to talk about what you do. So I'm fascinated and delighted to have this opportunity. So to start this off, could you just introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about you?
Sure, yeah. My name's David Ng, he, him pronouns. I guess I can give you my longer intro. I'm the co-artistic director, co-founding artistic director of Love Intersections, which is a media arts collective of queer artists of color with a mandate to share intersectional and intergenerational stories of queer, trans, and intersex Black and Indigenous people of color in our community. It's an organization that we started in 2018. I'm also a co-founding member of the Vancouver Artists Labor Union Cooperative. That organization has a mandate or a vision to provide flexible and living wage income for artists and cultural workers. And we run a unionized studio in Vancouver's Chinatown. And we also chartered a union to do this work to support artists and freelance workers. That's the Arts and Cultural Workers Union, which is an IATSE local B778. Those are sort of the bigger hats that I'm wearing right now. I'm also involved. Another big project is Primary Colors, which is we're now shifting to the name Cultivating Kin, which is an initiative to decolonize the Canadian art system by placing Indigenous arts practices at the center of the system, and trying to shift the ways that arts, how we look at arts, how we value arts in our community. And then lastly, I guess I should mention, Don, we know each other because I'm in the PhD program at the Social Justice Institute. And I'm in my 4th year. I can't believe how that time flies.
How'd that happen?
Yeah, exactly. It just, I couldn't believe it when I actually had to write, I'm in my 4th year. That sounds very weird.
But so you are incredibly busy. You've got a lot going on. What calls to you? What drives you?
Yeah, that's a good question. I've been thinking about that a lot because my supervisor also bugs me about being so busy. But I think, part of how I would frame it is these pieces that I've just described to you. So Love Intersections, which was really born out of a response to racism, systemic and structural stuff in a different way through storytelling, through celebrating stories. And, Value Co-op and School and Primary Colors, I see them all sort of as different facets of the same sort of ecology or community that I'm trying to shift. And so they all have they all kind of fit together. So when I'm thinking, for example, when I think about the PhD and what I'm sort of interested in researching, originally when I applied to the program, I was using language around the type of work that Love Intersections does is often not legible or excluded. And I'm using these quotes. You can't see it because I'm, of course, most people are just listening, but I'm using those quotes because that's language that I'm also moving away from as well. But that type of like trying to address why community arts, social practice arts, arts from racialized artists are viewed in a different way, are not valued in a certain way. That work is being done also in different ways by Value Co-op and Primary Colors and all the other stuff that I'm doing. And so I kind of see it as all of these different avenues as sort of working towards a similar goal, I guess.
So I'm curious, why is the art viewed differently?
I can answer that in a couple different ways. So I'm in the critical creative research stream. And so more commonly, it's known as research creation. And just a little bit of context, research creation at the PhD level. So that's a PhD where a knowledge production is expressed outside of just the written tomb of the dissertation. So, for example, there's a lot of artists who do like a studio practice who will express something that they're exploring, like in their epistemological inquiry through a visual art or studio practice.
Right.
That wasn't even the first PhD of that type, I think, was in 1991. So it's so if we sort of trace it, if I sort of explain it from that aspect, even art itself as a quote unquote legitimate form of knowledge production has had a lot of struggle. And then when you look dig it even deeper, and I'll get to where Love Intersections is situated, things like social practice and community arts, which are not really viewed as high art. So social practice is art that the medium is a community or relationships, social interaction. Community arts, working with grassroots communities, shifting sort of power or structures and decision-making to the community. All of that stuff is even more, and if I can sort of simply put in sort of the academic hierarchies, has really sort of been relegated, right? And so Love Intersections also straddles, like, most people see us as filmmakers. We do produce films, but part of what I'm trying to navigate or explore in my research is I view most of our work as social practice. So we're facilitating relationships. And sometimes in that cultivating of the relationships, there are artistic outputs. But why is it that, and this is what I'm interested in, is why is it that under certain systems, capitalism, race and whatnot, certain types of art forms are more legible or more valued than what we do in community? I'll give one more other quick example. The city of Vancouver's recently started recognizing what they're calling intangible art practices. So recognizing that some practices, so this is like cultural work in Indigenous communities and in Chinatown, for example, that are really important to those communities, but don't always necessarily have like a really tangible output that you can, say, for example, sell. They're starting to recognize that too. So that's sort of the kind of the messy place that I'm kind of interested in.
No, I love it. It's great. And that's a great explanation. Thank you. It helps me understand the depth of the issue. I mean, it's a big issue.
Yeah, and it's very, it's big. It's very complicated. I'm still honestly figuring out what my project is going to be as well. Yeah, I don't really have a quote unquote professional art training. I learned video in a really short course when I was in high school, and it's really been self-taught. I shouldn't say self-taught. I should say cultivated by a lot of different types of mentorship from the community, but never sort of like. So as I'm sort of really, now that the degree is research creation, and it is in this sort of, milieu of the contemporary art world and contending with what that means, I've also been kind of like, it's interesting to hear, like, there's this idea of like the artist as, independent genius, which is really something which a lot of obviously people push back on, but there's a certain type of practice where, it's like the artist in their studio, which is coming up with all of these, genius ideas, right? And it's the total opposite of what Love Intersections does. We deliberately, share power and decision making with our participants. ownership, really, we really reject sort of like this kind of we're the producer and we own the work. We really want the community to own it. And so as I'm sort of navigating the art world as well, it's sort of, I've had funders say, well, who's the lead artist that owns the work? And they really don't like it when I say, well, it's XY, all of these people.
We do. Yeah, we do.
Yeah. It's not just me, myself, right?
So this is probably crazy, but I have three thoughts. One is on your website, Love Intersections, you have written bitter Orientals. Also, you were quoted as saying, queerness to us necessitates temporal transformation. And I'm curious about some of the art installations you do. Can you unpack all of those crazy questions?
Sure. I'll try to do it as concisely as I can. So
okay.
The Bitter Orientals example is actually a really good one. So Bitter Orientals, the whole title is Bitter Orientals Yellow Peril Unmasked. And it was a art and culture symposium that was supposed to happen in February of 2022. That project grew out of a collaboration between Value Co-op and the Lim Association. So Value Co-op studio in Chinatown is located in the Lim Sai Hor Khao Mok Association building. And we got that lease because I've worked in that building for 22 years. And so I really know the landlords. But when we moved into that studio, we had long conversations about the accountability or responsibility that artists have because of the role that artists have played in gentrifying Chinatown and other neighborhoods as well. And so we mandated a community outreach working group, as well as a no profits, no kickbacks model into our constitution. So what that means is surpluses, when hopefully one day we have surpluses, surpluses that the co-op comes up gets redirected to either employing artists or to projects that serve the community. And so because our studio is in that building, we started with the relationship with the landlords. And in those early meetings in like 2019, we went up to the third floor to the association building, and one of the artists that we work with pointed to these really old, beautiful books. The artist Emily said, "Wow, these books are really beautiful." And one of the elders said, "We'd really love to digitize them because they're falling apart." And he also mentioned, we'd also love to build a website. And so as artists, we got very excited because this is amazing to be able to build this relationship to work with an archive. And so that project, we digitized the archives. We also recorded oral histories with the elders, and it grew and grew into several different art projects that was called at the time Engaging Chinatown. And then, as this conversations in the art world, but also in the community, really the work we were doing with the Lim Association really shifted during COVID because of the conversations around anti-Asian racism. And, we didn't set out doing work around specifically anti-Asian racism, but as things shifted, really shifting the context in terms of what the work was responding to.
Were you surprised?
I'm not necessarily surprised. We struggled because we then started, there was funding specifically for anti-Asian racism. And the reason why we really struggled was we started seeing a lot of projects that were very liberal and really not connected to the structural things that produce race and racism. So, and so we, for example, there was this granting stream that had one for anti-Indigenous racism, one for anti-Asian racism, and one for anti-Black racism. And we felt this sort of like draw to really interrogate that a little bit and actually think about what are the structural pieces that produce race that we can be addressing. And so that's where the Bitter Orientals came from, is this recognizing, and to respond to your question, Don, about temporality as well. Because the Lim project, through some of the projects like Hot Pot Talks, we were really thinking about what is this symbol, what is Chinatown physically and literally, but also like the symbol of this ethnic enclave that has a history of segregation. What does it mean to sort of evoke that now in the context of anti-Asian racism? And how do we do it in a way that addresses what's happening now in terms of race, right? And so bitter Orientals came from this frustration that we had and bitterness that we had. And of course,